Hey guys, tonight we step into the grimy, candlelit world of medieval beauty, where looking good could cost you more than a few coins. It might just cost you your life. Picture yourself in a damp stone castle, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke and unwashed wool, as you smear a questionable paste on your face, hoping it'll make you the fairest in the land. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this beauty routine without a few scars, or at least a rash. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I love knowing where you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in a medieval village, circa 1300, where beauty isn't just a luxury, it's a battlefield. The Middle Ages, roughly spanning the 5th to 15th centuries, were a time when looking fair was a status symbol, a sign of wealth, and sometimes a divine mandate. But the path to beauty was paved with bizarre, often dangerous practices that make your modern skincare routine look like a spa day. Imagine waking up in a thatched roof hut, your breath visible in the chilly morning air, and reaching for a jar of something that smells like sour milk and herbs. That's your face cream, and it's probably got ingredients that would make a chemist wince. The medieval obsession with beauty wasn't just about vanity, it was about survival in a world where appearances could dictate your social rank, your marriage prospects, or even your moral standing. Let's start with the basics. What did beautiful even mean back then? For women, the ideal was a pale, almost translucent complexion, a high forehead, and delicate features that screamed, "I don't toil in the fields." Men, too, chased ideals, think strong jaws and clear skin, signs of health in a world where disease was a constant shadow. But achieving this look, that's where things get weird. Take the quest for pale skin. You'd slather on concoctions made from lead, vinegar, or even arsenic to bleach your face. Yes, lead, the stuff we now know poisons you slowly. Back then, it was a go-to for that ghostly glow. One mainstream historical fact: noblewomen in the 14th century used ceruse, a white lead-based paste, to achieve that ethereal look, despite its tendency to eat away at skin over time. Chroniclers like Geoffrey Chaucer even described ladies with faces fair and white as the pinnacle of beauty, but they didn't mention the peeling skin or dizziness that came with it. Now, here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval beauty gurus swore by crocodile dung mixed with milk as a face mask. Sounds like something your eccentric aunt might try after too much mead, right? Supposedly, it exfoliated, but it also risked infections that could leave your face looking less noble maiden and more plague survivor. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread practice or just a wild recipe from a single unhinged apothecary, but it's a reminder that medieval beauty was a gamble. You'd smear on anything if someone claimed it worked. No FDA approval needed. You're probably wondering how they even came up with this stuff. Well, medieval beauty recipes were a mix of ancient wisdom, trial and error, and a hefty dose of desperation. Manuscripts like the Trotula, a 12th century text attributed to a woman named Trota of Salerno, offered detailed advice on cosmetics. You'd read instructions like, grind white lead with rosewater, or apply calf fat to soften hands. Sounds charming until you realize the lead could seep into your bloodstream, leaving you pale in all the wrong ways. The Trotula was a bestseller of its time, passed around among noblewomen who could read, but its recipes were as risky as they were revered. Let's paint the scene. You're in a dimly lit chamber, a wooden table cluttered with clay pots and glass vials. Your beauty kit includes a pestle and mortar, some wilted herbs, and a dubious jar of something labeled, for fairness. You mix it with trembling hands, hoping it'll make you look like the lady of the manor, not a scullery maid. The mirror, probably a polished piece of metal, shows a face that's already rough from wind and poor diet. You dab on the paste, feeling it sting. Is it working? Or is it just burning? Nobody's double-checking the ingredients, and the local healer's too busy leeching someone to care. Here's a little sarcasm for you. In a world where bathing was optional and plague was a personality trait, It's amazing anyone thought lead was the problem. But beauty was power, and power was worth the risk. You'd see noble women at court, their faces caked with white powder, smiling through the itch, while peasants like you might settle for a quick wipe with a rag dipped in ale. Class dictated your beauty budget, but everyone was chasing the same dream, to look like you belonged somewhere better. As you stand there, paste drying on your cheeks, you can't help but wonder who decided this was the look. The answer? A mix of culture, religion, and plain old peer pressure. The church had a lot to say about beauty. Spoiler, they weren't fans, but we'll get to that later. For now, you're stuck with this toxic goo and a prayer that it'll make you marriageable. The medieval world didn't mess around when it came to appearances, and you're about to learn just how far they'd go to chase perfection. You're still in that drafty medieval chamber, the sting of that lead-laced face cream lingering on your cheeks as you chase that coveted ghostly glow. The mirror's dim reflection taunts you, but now it's time to dig deeper into the toxic world of medieval cosmetics. Specifically, those powders and pastes that promised beauty but delivered a slow poison. The air smells faintly of vinegar and metal, and you're starting to suspect that radiant might just mean radioactive in 14th century terms. Let's face it, in a world where a bad harvest could kill you, slapping on a deadly face mask was just another Tuesday. The obsession with pale skin wasn't just a fashion whim, it was a social signal. A mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, a white complexion screamed wealth and idleness, proof you weren't toiling under the sun like a peasant. Noble women, and even some men, turned to ceruse, a paste of white lead and vinegar, to achieve that porcelain look. Chroniclers of the time, like those describing the courts of Edward III, noted ladies with faces like snow, but they skipped the part where prolonged use caused hair loss, tremors, or worse. You're dabbing this stuff on, feeling it cake into your pores, and it's not just heavy, it's heavy metal. The lead seeps in, slow and insidious, making your skin look flawless until it starts to gray and flake. Talk about a glow-up with a side of doom. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you wince. Some beauty enthusiasts used quicksilver, yep, mercury, to brighten their skin or remove blemishes. You'd rub it on, hoping for a smooth complexion, only to risk madness or kidney failure. One 13th century recipe from a French cosmetic manual suggested mixing mercury with rosewater for a gentle exfoliant. Gentle? More like a gamble with death. Historians still argue whether mercury was a niche fad or a common go-to, as surviving records are spotty and apothecaries weren't exactly keeping safety logs. But you can imagine the local healer shrugging. You look pale, so it's working, while you're shaking like a leaf. Picture yourself at a market stall, a wooden table groaning under jars of dubious powders. The vendor, with a grin missing a few teeth, swears this batch of ceruse is the finest from Venice. You hand over a coin, knowing it's a stretch for your budget, but beauty's worth it, right? The paste feels cool at first, almost luxurious, until it dries and cracks like a parched riverbed. You're not just hiding freckles, you're hiding the fact that you can't afford to look like a noble. The irony? Even the rich weren't safe. Queens and countesses, slathered in the same toxic gunk, faced the same risks, only they had fancier mirrors to watch their faces decay. Let's toss in a bit of sarcasm. In an era where people thought bathing spread disease, it's hilarious that they trusted a jar of literal poison to make them pretty. You're standing there, brushing on ceruse with a horsehair brush, hoping the court doesn't notice your skin starting to look like old parchment. The Trotula, that medieval beauty Bible we mentioned, had recipes for these pastes, often with charming instructions like, apply until the skin shines. Shines, sure, but at what cost? Some women mixed in ground pearls or egg whites for extra luster, which sounds fancy until you realize it's just lipstick on a toxic pig. The process wasn't just dangerous, it was a ritual. You'd sit by a fire, the room smoky and dim, grinding ingredients with a pestle. Maybe you'd add a splash of wine or urine. Yes, urine was a thing, for texture. The smell? Like a mix of sour milk and desperation. You'd layer it on, hoping to impress a suitor or dodge a priest's lecture on vanity. But every application was a roll of the dice. Would it be a rash today, or something worse down the line? The medieval beauty game didn't come with a warning label, and the stakes were higher than a bad hair day. Here's a scene to set the mood. You're at a banquet, candlelight flickering on the faces around you. The lady next to you, her face caked in white, looks like a statue, until she smiles, and the powder cracks. You wonder if she's hiding blemishes, or just the fact that she's been poisoning herself for years. The men aren't much better, some sporting their own subtle layers of powder to look refined. Everyone's playing the same game, chasing an ideal that's as fleeting as it is deadly. And you're just trying to keep up, hoping your face doesn't betray the fact that you're one bad batch away from a trip to the healer. The real kicker is how this obsession shaped society. Beauty wasn't just personal, it was political. A flawless face could secure a marriage alliance or a spot at court, while a blemished one might mark you as cursed or poor. You're starting to see why that jar of ceruse was worth its weight in gold, even if it came with a side of suffering. And as you'll soon discover, the quest for beauty didn't stop at your face. Your hair, teeth, and even your blood were next on the list. You're still clutching that cracked mirror, the faint sting of ceruse lingering on your skin, but now your gaze shifts upward to your hair, or what's left of it. In the medieval world, hair was a crown you couldn't take off, and keeping it lush, long, and lustrous was a battle against nature, filth, and some truly unhinged beauty hacks. You're in a smoky chamber, the air heavy with the scent of herbs and something suspiciously like rancid fat, as you prepare to tame your tangled mane. Spoiler: this isn't going to be a relaxing hair care day at the salon. Hair in the Middle Ages was a big deal. Your social status, piety, and even marriageability could hinge on it. A mainstream historical fact: noblewomen aimed for long, flowing locks, often blonde or light brown, as these were seen as divine and pure, inspired by depictions of saints and the Virgin Mary in manuscripts like the Book of Hours. You're combing through your hair with a bone comb, wincing as it snags, and dreaming of that silky cascade you saw on a lady at court. But getting there, that's where the horror show begins. The tools and treatments were as brutal as the standards were high. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you cringe. Some medieval women used a mix of lizard fat and pigeon droppings as a hair conditioner. Yes, you heard that right. Pigeon poop, smeared into your scalp to strengthen your strands. One 14th century recipe from an Italian cosmetic text swore it would make your hair grow thicker, though it probably just made you smell like a barnyard. Historians still argue whether this was a common practice or a quirky outlier, as surviving records often come from elite sources who could afford to experiment with such nonsense. Either way, you're rubbing this stuff in, praying it works, while your nose begs for mercy. Picture the scene: you're perched on a wooden stool, a flickering candle casting shadows on the wall. Your hair care kit is a mess of clay pots filled with oily pastes and crumbled herbs. You've got a comb that's more splinters than teeth, and you're working through knots that feel like they've been there since the last crusade. The goal is to make your hair look like it belongs on a tapestry, but the reality is you're fighting a losing battle against dirt, lice, and the occasional bald patch. Why baldness? Because medieval beauty standards didn't just demand long hair, they demanded perfect hair, and people went to extremes to fake it. Let's toss in some sarcasm. In a world where you're lucky to survive a cold, it's peak comedy that you're stressing over split ends while rubbing animal fat into your scalp. One popular treatment was a paste of burnt barley bread and bear grease, because nothing says radiant like smelling like a forest fire. You'd slather it on, let it sit, and hope it didn't attract every flea in the village. If you were fancy, you might add rosewater to mask the stench, but let's be real. No amount of rosewater could cover up bear grease. The trotula we mentioned earlier had a whole section on hair, suggesting things like nettle juice to prevent hair loss. Sounds harmless until you realize nettles sting like a swarm of bees if not prepared right. Baldness was the ultimate embarrassment, especially for men. You're a merchant, maybe, trying to look respectable, but your hairline's retreating faster than a French army at Agincourt. What do? You might try a miracle tonic of wine and onion juice, rubbed into your scalp daily. Did it work? Probably not, but it made you smell like a tavern's floor. Women faced even harsher judgment. Thin hair could tank your marriage prospects. Some turned to wigs, made from horsehair, or even human hair bought from the poor. Imagine the creep factor of wearing a stranger's locks, itching under the weight, hoping nobody notices it's not yours. Here's a vivid moment. You're at a village fair, eyeing a noblewoman's golden braids, wondering if they're real or just a really good wig. Your own hair is a mess, caked with yesterday's conditioner and a few stray bits of straw from your bed. You overhear a barber bragging about his latest hair growth potion, but you're skeptical. He's also the guy who pulls teeth and lances boils. Still, you're tempted. Beauty is power, and power means not looking like you just crawled out of a haystack. The stakes were high because hair wasn't just aesthetic, it was symbolic. Long, uncovered hair signaled youth and virginity for women, while men's well-groomed locks showed discipline and wealth. But maintaining it was a nightmare. You're dodging lice, which were so common they were practically a personality trait, and praying your latest potion doesn't burn your scalp raw. And let's not forget the church, always lurking, ready to call your hair care routine a sin. We'll get to their beauty bans later, but for now, you're just trying to avoid baldness and bad vibes. As you comb through another tangle, you're starting to see why that noblewoman's perfect hair was worth the risk. But the cost, both to your health and your sanity, is steeper than you expected. And if you think hair care was rough, wait until you hear about what they did to their teeth. You're still in that chilly medieval chamber, your hair barely tamed from that lizard fat and poop disaster, and now your gaze drops to your mouth. You flash a smile at your blurry reflection in that polished metal disc, hoping for a dazzling grin, but your teeth look more like a forgotten graveyard than a courtly charm. In the Middle Ages, a bright smile was a status symbol, a sign you could afford more than moldy bread and weren't cursed by some divine dental wrath. But getting those pearly whites? You're about to dive into a world of abrasive pastes, painful fixes, and remedies that make your modern toothbrush look like a gift from heaven. Teeth were a big deal in medieval Europe. Clean, white ones signaled health, wealth, and maybe a touch of divine favor. A mainstream historical fact, dental care was rudimentary, and the wealthy used abrasive pastes made from ground pumice, chalk, or even coral to scrub their teeth, as described in texts like the Chirurgia by Surgeon Guy de Chauliac in the 14th century. You're standing there, dipping a cloth into a gritty mixture that feels like sand and smells like burnt herbs. You rub it across your teeth, wincing as it scrapes your gums raw. The goal: a smile that could catch a noble's eye, or at least not scare them off at a feast. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you gag. Some medieval folks used urine, yes, human urine, as a mouthwash to whiten teeth. Supposedly, its ammonia content could bleach stains, and recipes from obscure cosmetic manuals swore by it. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread practice or just a gross fad among the desperate, but imagine swishing that around while trying to look regal. You're gargling this miracle rinse, holding your breath, hoping it'll make your teeth gleam like the pearls in a lady's necklace. Spoiler: it probably just made your breath smell like a privy. Picture the scene: you're hunched over a wooden bowl, mixing your latest dental paste with a stick. The ingredients: chalk, a pinch of sage, and maybe some crushed bone for extra grit. The room's dim, the air thick with the scent of damp wool and whatever's burning in the hearth. Your teeth ache from last night's tough mutton, and you're praying this paste doesn't make things worse. If you're lucky, you've got a twig or a cloth to apply it. If not, you're using your finger, scraping away and hoping you don't chip a tooth. The wealthy might visit a barber surgeon, who'd yank out a bad tooth with pliers and no anesthetic. Fun times. You're not that desperate yet, but the thought lingers. Let's sprinkle in some sarcasm. In an era where you're dodging plague and praying your well water isn't poisoned, it's peak medieval logic to scrub your teeth with what's basically flavored gravel. If your paste was too harsh, you'd end up with bleeding gums or enamel so worn you'd be sipping gruel forever. Some folks tried gentler options, like chewing on mint or fennel seeds to freshen breath. But those were hard to come by unless you had coin or a garden. The trotula we mentioned before suggested rubbing teeth with cuttlefish bone for a polished look, because nothing says glamour like fish skeleton in your mouth. Dental woes weren't just cosmetic, they were social dynamite. A missing tooth or a blackened grin could mark you as poor, sick, or morally suspect. You're at a village wedding, trying to charm a suitor, but every time you smile, they flinch. You've heard whispers of tooth powders sold by traveling merchants, promising miracles, but half the time they're just chalk mixed with dirt. If you're really desperate, you might try a trick from the lower classes, rubbing your teeth with ash from the fire. It's free, but it leaves your mouth tasting like a bonfire gone wrong. Here's a vivid moment. You're at a market, eyeing a stall where a tooth puller waves a pair of rusty pliers like he's conducting a symphony. He's boasting about his painless extractions, but the screams from his last customer tell a different story. You clutch your jar of homemade paste, wondering if it's worth the risk. Nearby, a noblewoman with suspiciously perfect teeth breezes by. Rumor has it she's got false ones carved from bone or ivory. You can't afford that, so you stick to your gritty scrub, hoping it'll at least keep the priest from lecturing you about vanity. The church, by the way, had opinions on your smile. Too much effort on your teeth could be seen as prideful, a sin we'll dig into later. For now, you're just trying to avoid a lecture while keeping your teeth intact. But the stakes are high. A good smile could mean a better marriage, a higher status, or at least fewer whispers behind your back. As you rinse your mouth with well water, praying it's clean, you're starting to realize beauty's not just skin deep, it's a full body ordeal, and your teeth are just the beginning. You're still wincing from that gritty toothpaste, your mouth tasting like chalk and regret, but now your nose wrinkles at a new challenge: medieval perfume. You're in that same drafty chamber, the air thick with the scent of damp stone and yesterday's stew, and you're reaching for a vial that promises to make you smell like nobility instead of a barnyard. In the Middle Ages, a pleasant scent wasn't just a luxury, it was a social weapon, a way to mask the stench of unwashed bodies and prove you were above the common muck. But the ingredients in these fragrances? They're about to make you question every life choice that led you here. Scent was a status symbol in medieval Europe, where bathing was rare and sweat was a fact of life. A mainstream historical fact: the wealthy used perfumes made from imported ingredients like musk, ambergris, and rose oil, as noted in trade records from 13th century Venice, a hub for exotic goods. You're dabbing a sticky oil behind your ears, hoping it'll make you smell like a garden instead of the stable you slept near last night. The vial's contents are precious, costing more than your monthly bread budget, but the scent is strong, almost cloying, and you're not entirely sure what's in it. Spoiler: you don't want to know. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you gag. Some medieval perfumes included civet, a secretion from a cat-like creature's glands, or even beaver castoreum, which smells musky and, well, let's just say it's not vegan-friendly. A 14th century apothecary's manual from Florence listed civet as a noble scent, mixed with wine or oil to make it bearable. Historians still argue whether these animal-based ingredients were common or just a weird flex for the ultra-rich, but you're applying this stuff, praying it doesn't make you smell like a zoo. The worst part: it might have been stored in a lead-lined bottle, adding a toxic twist to your signature scent. Picture yourself at a merchant's stall in a bustling market, the air buzzing with shouts and the stench of livestock. The vendor, with a sly grin, offers you a tiny glass vial of Eastern perfume, swearing it's what the queen herself uses. You hand over a silver coin, feeling fancy, and uncork it to find a smell that's half rose, half something suspiciously like wet dog. You dab it on anyway, hoping it'll impress at tonight's feast. The application is messy, your fingers are sticky, and the oil stains your sleeve, but in a world where everyone smells like sweat and smoke, even a questionable scent is a step up. Let's add some sarcasm. In an era where people thought fresh air caused plague, it's pure genius to douse yourself in beaver juice to smell refined. The trotula we've been leaning on had perfume recipes, suggesting things like boiling rose petals with cloves or mixing myrrh with wine. Sounds poetic until you realize myrrh could burn your skin if mixed wrong, and wine-based scents turned rancid fast. If you were poor, you might settle for rubbing lavender or sage on your wrists. Free if you could forage, but good luck finding untrampled herbs in a muddy village. The process was as much ritual as necessity. You're sitting by a fire, the room dim and smoky, crushing dried flowers with a mortar and pestle. Maybe you add a drop of oil you bartered for, or, yep, some animal fat to make it stick. The smell fills the room, and for a moment, you feel like royalty. Then a whiff of something foul hits you, and you realize your perfume might have gone off. Or maybe it's just the chamber pot in the corner. Hard to tell in this era. Here's a vivid scene. You're at a banquet, surrounded by lords and ladies, their scents clashing like a floral battlefield. One woman's rose oil is overpowering, another's musk makes your eyes water, and you're just trying to keep your own civet-laced dab from betraying you. Everyone's pretending they don't smell the underlying odor of unwashed wool and stale bread. You catch a nobleman sniffing his sleeve, probably checking if his own perfume's holding up. It's a fragile dance. Smell good, and you're in. Smell bad, and you're out. Scent wasn't just about attraction, it was survival. A good fragrance could mask illness, signal wealth, or even ward off bad air, thought to carry disease. But the risks were real. Some ingredients caused rashes, others were toxic over time. You're starting to see why beauty was such a gamble. Every step, from your face to your hair to your scent, was a roll of the dice. And as you'll soon discover, even bathing, when it happened, was its own kind of ordeal. You're still catching whiffs of that questionable civet perfume, your fingers sticky from dabbing it on. But now you're staring at a wooden bucket in your chilly chamber, wondering if you can stomach a bath. In the medieval world, bathing was less spa day and more once-in-a-blue-moon ordeal, and the reality of staying clean was as grim as the streets outside your door. You're surrounded by the scent of wood smoke and damp straw, and the idea of smelling fresh feels like chasing a unicorn. Hygiene in the Middle Ages wasn't just a chore, it was a luxury, and sometimes a downright risk. Let's set the stage with a mainstream historical fact. Bathing was rare for most medieval Europeans, especially among the lower classes, as public bathhouses declined after the fall of Rome, and many believed frequent washing invited illness. By the 14th century, as chronicled in urban records from cities like London, bathhouses were making a comeback in some areas, but they were mostly for the wealthy or for special occasions like weddings. You're a commoner, so your bath is a bucket of cold water hauled from a well, maybe warmed over a fire if you're lucky. You dip a rag in, scrub your arms, and call it a day. The water's murky by the second swipe, and you're pretty sure it's dirtier than you are. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you shudder. Some medieval folks thought bathing in ass's milk, yep, donkey milk, was a beauty secret for soft skin, a trick supposedly borrowed from ancient queens like Cleopatra. A 13th century cosmetic text from Spain claimed it could renew the flesh, but good luck finding a donkey willing to cooperate. Historians still argue whether this was a real trend or just elite nonsense, as milk was too valuable to waste on baths for most. You're stuck with plain water, maybe spiked with herbs like rosemary if you've got them, but the smell of mildew clings to you like a bad reputation. Picture the scene. You're crouched by the bucket, the room lit by a single candle that's dripping wax onto the floor. Your bathroom is just a corner of your hut, with a curtain of rough cloth for privacy if you're fancy. The water's so cold it makes your teeth chatter, and you're rationing it because hauling more means a trek to the well. You scrub your face and neck, avoiding your hair since you just dealt with that greasy mess. If you're in a town with a bathhouse, you might splurge once a year. Picture a steamy, crowded room where everyone's sharing the same tub. Hygienic? Hardly. You're trading dirt for someone else's grime. Let's toss in some sarcasm. In a world where people thought bad air caused plague, it's hilarious that you're avoiding a bath because it might make you sick. The church didn't help, preaching that too much washing was vain or even sinful. More on their beauty bans later. For now, you're just trying to clean enough to avoid scaring the neighbors. If you're wealthy, you might have a wooden tub lined with cloth, filled with water scented with lavender or sage. But even then, servants are reusing that water for the whole household, so you're basically marinating in someone else's sweat. Hygiene wasn't just about cleanliness, it was a class marker. Nobles could afford private baths or attendants to scrub them down, while you're lucky if your rag doesn't disintegrate mid-wipe. Some folks used dry baths, rubbing their skin with herbs or cloths to cleanse, without water, because, water's scary. The trotula we've been referencing suggested wiping the face with rose water-soaked cloths for a fresh look, but rosewater was a luxury, and you're more likely to have ale-soaked rags. Either way, you're not exactly glowing with cleanliness. Here's a vivid moment. You're at a village feast, hoping to blend in with the slightly less grimy crowd. You've scrubbed your face and hands, but the guy next to you smells like he's been wrestling pigs. A noblewoman glides by, her skin faintly scented with herbs, and you wonder if she's got a secret stash of donkey milk. You catch a glimpse of your reflection in a polished spoon. Your face is passable, but your neck's still streaked with dirt. Bathing's a gamble. Too much, and you risk illness or sin. Too little, and you're the village pariah. The stakes were high because cleanliness tied directly to beauty and status. A clean-ish appearance could signal wealth or godliness, while a filthy one marked you as a peasant or worse. You're starting to see why every beauty step, face, hair, teeth, scent, and now hygiene, was a minefield. And if you think scrubbing with a rag was rough, wait until you try on medieval fashion's torture devices. You've barely dried off from that frigid bucket bath, your skin prickling in the chilly air of your medieval hut, and now you're eyeing a pile of clothes that look more like instruments of torture than fashion. In the Middle Ages, dressing beautifully wasn't just about style, it was a public declaration of status, wealth, and sometimes survival. You're tugging at a stiff, heavy garment, hoping it'll transform you into someone who belongs at court, but the reality is you're about to squeeze into a world of pain. Medieval fashion was as brutal as it was glamorous, and you're about to feel every pinch. Clothing was a cornerstone of medieval beauty, signaling everything from your rank to your moral fiber. A mainstream historical fact, by the 14th century, as seen in sumptuary laws like those in England under Edward III, clothing was tightly regulated to keep classes distinct. Nobles wore silks and furs, while peasants like you were stuck with rough wool or linen. You're wrestling with a corset-like bodice or a tightly laced kirtle, the fabric digging into your ribs. It's supposed to give you that coveted hourglass shape, but it feels like your lungs are staging a protest. The goal: look like you don't need to breathe or work. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you squirm. Some noblewomen wore shoes called polaines, with pointed toes so long they had to be chained to the knee to avoid tripping. A 15th century chronicle from Paris describes these as devilish fashion, and no wonder, you're hobbling around, praying you don't faceplant at the market. Historians still argue whether polaines were purely elite or if ambitious commoners copied them, but either way, they were a literal pain. You're sticking with plain leather shoes, but even those are stiff and blister-inducing, especially since they're rarely made to fit your actual feet. Picture the scene: you're in a cramped room, the air thick with the smell of wool and wood smoke, struggling to lace up a bodice with cords that feel like they're plotting your demise. Your dress is heavy, layered with underskirts to give it shape, and every movement feels like a workout. If you're lucky, you've got a single pin to hold it all together. Lose it, and your outfit's a disaster. Nobles might add fur trim or gold embroidery, but you're stuck with plain cloth, maybe dyed with woad if you could afford it. The dye smells like a swamp, but at least it's not your natural peasant beige. Let's add some sarcasm. In a world where you're dodging mud and plague, it's pure genius to wear shoes you can't walk in and a corset that makes breathing optional. Fashion wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Tight lacing could bruise ribs or worse, and heavy fabrics dragged through muddy streets could carry disease. The trotula we've referenced before didn't cover clothing, but it did suggest padded headpieces to enhance your silhouette, because nothing says healthy like a fake forehead bump. You're adjusting a wimple, a cloth head covering, hoping it hides your unwashed hair while making you look pious. Spoiler: it just makes you itch. The stakes were high because fashion was a social contract. A well-dressed noblewoman could secure alliances or favor, while a poorly dressed peasant might be mocked or worse, fined for breaking sumptuary laws. You're at a village fair, eyeing a lady in a velvet gown, her waist cinched so tight you wonder if she's still conscious. Your own dress is patched, but you've tied it tightly, hoping to mimic her shape. Men weren't spared either. Nobles wore padded doublets to fake broad shoulders, while you might stuff your tunic with straw for the same effect. It's scratchy, but hey, at least you look slightly less scrawny. Here's a vivid moment. You're at a castle banquet, surrounded by lords in fur-lined cloaks and ladies in gowns that shimmer by candlelight. Your own outfit feels like a sack, but you've pinned it to look intentional. Someone's pelaine trips a servant, sending a tray of bread flying, and you stifle a laugh. Medieval fashion's a comedy and a tragedy all at once. You catch a glimpse of your reflection in a polished goblet, your silhouette's passable, but your ribs are screaming. Beauty's worth it, right? Fashion wasn't just about looks, it was power. The wrong outfit could mark you as an outsider, while the right one might get you a seat closer to the fire. But the cost was steep, from bruised bodies to drained purses. You're starting to see why every beauty choice, from face to scent to clothes, was a calculated risk. And if you think tight lacing was bad, wait until you hear about letting blood for beauty's sake. You're still aching from that suffocating bodice, your ribs bruised from medieval fashion's cruel embrace, and now you're eyeing a small, gleaming blade on the table. In the flickering candlelight of your damp chamber, the air smells faintly of wool and fear, and you're about to dive into one of the Middle Ages' most chilling beauty trends, bloodletting. Yes, you're supposed to let someone slice you open to look healthier, shinier, and, somehow, more beautiful. This isn't just a medical quirk, it's a full-on medieval obsession with balancing your body to boost your glow, and you're wondering if you'll survive the process. Bloodletting was a cornerstone of medieval medicine, tied directly to beauty through the belief that it purified your body and enhanced your appearance. A mainstream historical fact, based on the humoral theory from ancient Greece, widely practiced in Europe through the 14th century as described in medical texts like those of Galen, bloodletting was thought to balance the body's four humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, to restore health and vitality. You're sitting on a wooden stool, a barber surgeon hovering with a lancet, promising that draining a bit of blood will make your cheeks rosy and your skin clear. The catch. One wrong move, and you're fainting, or worse, in a pool of your own beauty treatment. Here's a quirky tidbit to make your stomach turn. Some women believed letting blood from specific veins, like those behind the ears, could enhance facial beauty by reducing excess heat that caused blemishes. A 13th century surgical manual from Bologna suggested this for a fairer countenance, but it often left scars or infections. Historians still argue whether this was a common beauty practice or mostly a medical one dressed up as cosmetic, but you're staring at that blade, hoping it's at least clean. The surgeon's hands are grubby, and you're pretty sure he just used that lancet to trim someone's beard. Picture the scene. You're in a cramped shop, the walls lined with jars of herbs and a faint smell of iron in the air. The barber surgeon, who doubles as the local dentist and hair cutter, ties a cloth around your arm to make your veins pop. You grit your teeth as he slices, and warm blood drips into a bowl. It's supposed to make you look vibrant, but right now, you just feel dizzy. If you're wealthy, you might do this in a fancier setting, with a physician chanting Latin to make it feel legit. If you're a peasant like you, it's just you, a dirty blade, and a prayer that you don't pass out before dinner. Let's sprinkle in some sarcasm. In a world where you're lucky to avoid dysentery, it's peak brilliance to voluntarily bleed yourself for a better complexion. The logic was that bad blood caused everything from pimples to bad moods, so letting it out was like hitting reset. The Trotula, our go-to beauty guide, didn't explicitly endorse bloodletting for looks, but it did suggest purging the body for health, which people stretched to mean beauty. Some even timed their sessions with the moon's phases, because nothing says science like lunar-guided blood loss. You're wondering if that rosy glow is worth the risk of infection or, death. The process was as much ritual as medicine. You'd visit the barber surgeon monthly, maybe more if you were desperate to impress. Each session left you weaker, but the promise of clear skin or a balanced body kept you coming back. For women, a pale yet rosy look was the goal. Ironic, since bloodletting could leave you paler than a ghost, and not in the good way. Men did it too, chasing vigor, but everyone was after that healthy, I'm not dying of plague vibe. The reality. Infections were common, and too much bleeding could weaken you for weeks. Here's a vivid moment. You're at a village market, feeling light-headed from your latest treatment, when you spot a noblewoman with cheeks so pink she must have been bled that morning. Her veil hides the scar behind her ear, but you know the trick. You clutch your own bandaged arm, hoping your sacrifice pays off at tonight's feast. The crowd's buzzing, but you're too woozy to care, and the smell of blood lingers on your sleeve. Beauty's a battlefield, and you're losing more than just blood. The stakes were high because a healthy appearance could mean social acceptance or a better marriage. But the risks, sepsis, fainting, or worse, were just as real. You're starting to see why medieval beauty was a game of roulette, from lead-laced face creams to now literal bloodletting. And if you think slicing veins was wild, wait until you mix some of the herbal potions they swore by. You're still woozy from that bloodletting session, the bandage on your arm itching as you sit in your dim, smoky chamber, surrounded by the faint hum of medieval life. Now, you're reaching for a clay pot filled with crushed leaves and roots, hoping to brew a potion that'll make your skin glow or your hair stop falling out. In the Middle Ages, herbs were the backbone of beauty, promising miracles but often delivering a mix of hope, failure, and the occasional rash. You're stirring a murky concoction, the smell sharp and earthy, wondering if this herbal gamble will make you look like a lady or just smell like a compost heap. Herbal remedies were a staple of medieval beauty, rooted in both medicine and folklore. A mainstream historical fact, texts like the Herbarium of Pseudo-Apuleius, widely circulated in the 12th century, listed plants like chamomile and sage for skin and hair treatments, believed to restore vitality or enhance appearance. You're crushing dried nettles with a pestle, mixing them with ale or vinegar, aiming for a face mask that'll supposedly banish blemishes. The mixture stings as you apply it, and you're praying it doesn't turn your face redder than a summer apple. Herbs were everywhere, but knowing which ones worked and which ones burned was a game of trust and luck. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you grimace. Some beauty recipes called for fox fat mixed with herbs like rosemary to strengthen hair or clear skin. A 14th century English manuscript swore it could make your locks shine, but it probably just made you smell like a forest predator. Historians still argue whether such animal-based herb mixes were common or just the fevered dreams of overzealous apothecaries, but you're slathering this stuff on, hoping for a miracle while gagging at the stench. The worst part. If the herbs were misidentified, say, hemlock instead of parsley, you might end up poisoned instead of pretty. Picture the scene, you're hunched over a wooden table, a fire crackling nearby, as you grind herbs with a mortar that's seen better days. Your beauty station is a mess of wilted leaves, sticky oils, and a jug of questionable water. You're following a recipe whispered by a neighbor, who got it from a healer, who probably made it up. The paste you're mixing looks like something you'd feed a cow, but you smear it on your face anyway, hoping it'll smooth out that stubborn blemish. If you're lucky, you've got access to common herbs like mint or lavender. If not, you're stuck with whatever grows by the roadside. Dandelion, anyone? Let's toss in some sarcasm. In an era where you're dodging plague and praying your bread isn't moldy, it's peak wisdom to trust a random weed to make you gorgeous. The Trotula, our trusty beauty guide, loved herbs, suggesting things like fennel seed paste for soft skin or comfrey for healing scars. Sounds nice until you realize comfrey could irritate your skin if mixed wrong, and fennel might just make you smell like a bad stew. You're stirring this potion, hoping it doesn't burn, while wondering if the local wise woman actually knows her plants or just likes the coin you paid her. The process was a mix of hope and desperation. You'd trek to a market or forest to gather herbs, bartering for rare ones like myrrh if you had the means. Every application was a leap of faith. Some herbs soothed, others inflamed, and a few could kill you in large doses. You're thinking of that crocodile dung face mask from earlier and wondering if this herbal paste is any better. Spoiler: it's a toss-up. Women and men alike chased these remedies, believing a clear complexion or thick hair could elevate their status or charm a suitor. Here's a vivid moment. You're at a village gathering, your face still tingling from that nettle mask, when you spot a merchant's wife with suspiciously flawless skin. Rumor has it she uses a secret herb blend from the east, but you're stuck with local weeds. You catch a whiff of your own potion, a mix of sage and grease, and hope it's working. The crowd's buzzing, but you're distracted, wondering if your face is glowing or just red from irritation. Beauty's a gamble, and you're all in. Herbs weren't just about looks, they tied to health and spirituality. A clear face meant a pure soul, or so the church claimed, though they'd scold you for vanity in the next breath. The stakes were high. A good potion could mean admiration, while a steward's wife had a whole wardrobe of poisonous beauty tricks to navigate, and you're starting to see why every step was a risky one. Next up, you'll chase the impossible standards set by royalty. You're still wiping that stinging herbal paste off your face, the scent of nettles clinging to your fingers, as you catch a glimpse of a royal portrait hanging in a nearby hall. The queen's image, pale, serene, with a forehead high enough to land a hawk on, sets the bar for beauty so high you're dizzy just thinking about it. In the medieval world, royalty didn't just rule kingdoms, they ruled beauty standards, and you're about to chase ideals that make your lead-laced face cream and bloodletting sessions look like child's play. You're in your cramped chamber, the air heavy with wood smoke, dreaming of looking like a queen, but the reality is a lot less regal. Royal beauty standards were the gold standard in medieval Europe, shaping how everyone from nobles to peasants primped. A mainstream historical fact: queens like Eleanor of Aquitaine in the 12th century were celebrated for their fair skin, delicate features, and elaborate hairstyles, as described in courtly poetry and chronicles like those of Geoffrey of Monmouth. You're gazing at your reflection in a murky puddle, wishing your skin could match that porcelain ideal. Queens set the tone with their wealth and access to exotic cosmetics, and you're stuck trying to mimic them with whatever you can scrounge. Maybe a bit of chalk for that pale look or a ribbon to fake their braided elegance. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you chuckle. Some royal women plucked or shaved their foreheads to make them appear higher, a trend noted in 14th century French courts where a broad brow was seen as angelic. Imagine sitting there, tweezing your hairline with crude iron pincers, wincing with every yank, just to look like you're closer to God. Historians still argue whether this was purely a noble fad or if ambitious commoners like you tried it too, but the thought of voluntarily balding yourself for beauty is peak medieval madness. You're tempted to try it, but your comb's already doing enough damage. Picture the scene: you're in a bustling market, eyeing a noblewoman who looks like she stepped out of a royal tapestry. Her skin's unnaturally white, thanks to that ceruse we talked about, and her hair's coiled into braids that must have taken hours. You're clutching a scrap of linen, hoping to tie it around your head like her velvet headdress, but it just looks like you're hiding a bad hair day. Queens and their courts drove these trends, importing silks from the East or perfumes from Arabia, and you're left with local herbs and a dream. Your best bet: smearing on more of that questionable paste and praying it passes for royal radiance. Let's toss in some sarcasm. In a world where you're lucky to eat twice a day, it's hilarious that you're stressing over a forehead that's not quite cathedral-worthy. The Trotula, our go-to beauty manual, suggested tricks like rosewater washes to mimic the soft skin of queens, but rosewater's a luxury you can't afford. Instead, you're using plain water and a bit of stolen lavender, hoping it'll fool someone into thinking you're highborn. Royal standards weren't just about looks, they were about power. A queen's beauty signaled divine favor, and copying her was your ticket to social climbing, even if it meant plucking your hairline raw. The process was grueling. You'd spend hours braiding your hair to mimic courtly styles, only for it to unravel in the wind. Or you'd starve yourself to look delicate, because queens were never plump. That was for peasants who actually ate. Men weren't spared either. Kings like Richard the Lionheart were praised for their noble features, so you might see men rubbing herbs on their beards to look more kingly. The pressure was relentless, and the gap between you and royalty felt like a chasm. Every tweak to your appearance was a step toward that unattainable ideal, but it came with a cost: time, money, and sometimes your health. Here's a vivid moment. You're at a village feast, watching a noblewoman who's clearly been to court. Her gown's embroidered with gold, her face is a mask of white lead, and her forehead so high it's practically a billboard. You've tried to copy her look, but your chalk-dusted face is cracking, and your ribbon keeps slipping. The locals whisper about her, half in awe, half in envy, and you wonder if all this effort is worth it. Beauty like hers could open doors, but you're starting to realize those doors are locked to folks like you. Royal standards didn't just shape beauty, they shaped society. Looking noble could mean a better marriage or a lord's favor, but failing meant being dismissed as common. You're catching on to why beauty was such a brutal game, from toxic pastes to now chasing a queen's impossible glow. And if you think royalty had it tough, wait until you see how peasants stacked up against nobles. You're still reeling from those royal beauty standards, your chalk-dusted face a poor imitation of a queen's glow, as you step out into the muddy streets of your medieval village. The gap between you, a peasant, and the nobles strutting around in their silks is wider than the moat around a castle. Beauty in the Middle Ages wasn't just a personal quest, it was a class war, with nobles flaunting their polished looks while you're stuck scrubbing dirt off your hands with a rag. You're dodging puddles and dreaming of noble elegance, but the reality of peasant beauty is a gritty, makeshift struggle. The divide between peasant and noble beauty was stark, rooted in wealth and access. A mainstream historical fact: nobles had access to imported cosmetics and professional attendants, as seen in 14th century household accounts from courts like that of Philippa of Hainaut, while peasants relied on homemade remedies or nothing at all. You're rubbing your face with a mix of lard and herbs, hoping it mimics the ceruse nobles use, but it just leaves you greasy. Nobles have mirrors of polished silver. You've got a bucket of water that's more mud than reflection. Their skin stays pale because they don't toil in the sun. You're sunburned from fieldwork, and no amount of chalk can hide it. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you smirk. Peasants sometimes used flour, yes, baking flour, as a cheap face powder to fake that noble pallor. A 13th century satirical poem from England mocks a peasant girl, dusted like a loaf, to look refined, but it washed off in the rain. Historians still argue whether this was a common trick or just a joke, but you're tempted to try it, sneaking a pinch from the kitchen. The problem: it cakes in your sweat, and you end up looking like a poorly baked bun rather than a courtly lady. Picture the scene: you're at the edge of a market, watching a noblewoman glide by, her face white as snow, her hair hidden under a silk veil. Your own hair's tied back with a scrap of cloth, and your dress, patched wool, not velvet, marks you as lesser before you even open your mouth. You've tried to mimic her look, smearing on that lard and herb mix, but it's no match for her imported rosewater or lead-based creams. Nobles have servants to braid their hair or apply their makeup. You're lucky if you've got a sister to help with a comb. Your beauty routine is whatever you can forage or barter, while theirs is a production worthy of a king's ransom. Let's add some sarcasm. In a world where you're praying your crops don't fail, it's pure comedy that you're stealing flour to play noble for a day. The trotula we've been leaning on was written for elites, so its recipes, like almond oil for soft hands, are a pipe dream for you. Instead, you're using goose fat or ale-soaked herbs, which smell like a tavern's floor. Nobles could afford to bathe occasionally, even if it was just in a fancy tub. You're still haunted by that bucket bath, and your clean is more like slightly less filthy. The class gap wasn't just about money, it was about time, resources, and the sheer ability to care about your looks. The stakes were brutal. A noble's beauty could secure alliances or favor. Your lack of it could keep you invisible, or worse, mocked. You're at a village dance, hoping to catch a suitor's eye, but your rough hands and sunburned face scream, peasant. Meanwhile, a noblewoman's pale complexion and delicate hands, kept soft by never lifting a plow, make her the star. Men faced this too. A nobleman's groomed beard and fine tunic signaled power, while your patched cloak and tangled hair mark you as a laborer. You might try a trick like rubbing walnut shells on your skin for a fake tan, another peasant hack, but it just leaves you streaky and smelling like a forest. Here's a vivid moment. You're at a harvest festival, standing in the shadow of a noble's entourage. Their clothes shimmer, their faces glow, and you're clutching a stolen daub of flour paste, hoping it holds up. A passing merchant laughs, calling you the miller's ghost, and you blush under your makeshift makeup. You catch your reflection in a nearby stream. Your face is patchy, your hair's a mess, and you're nowhere near noble. Beauty's a ladder, and you're stuck on the bottom rung. The class divide shaped every beauty choice. Nobles had the tools, time, and money to chase perfection. You're just trying to look less like you wrestled a pig. But even peasants dreamed big, scraping together what they could to mimic their betters. You're starting to see why beauty was such a battlefield, and if you think this gap was rough, wait until you tackle the men's side of medieval grooming. You're still stinging from that flour paste flop, the laughter of the market crowd echoing in your ears as you trudge back to your dim hut, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and smoke. Now, you're shifting focus to the men around you, whose grooming habits were just as wild, and sometimes just as painful, as the women's. In the medieval world, men weren't spared the pressure to look noble, and their beauty routines were a mix of rugged pride, bizarre hacks, and the occasional brush with disaster. You're watching a neighbor sharpen a blade, not for battle but for his beard, and you're about to dive into the hairy, sweaty world of medieval male grooming. Men's appearance was a big deal, tied to status and masculinity. A mainstream historical fact, in the 14th century, as seen in court records and chronicles like those of Jean Froissart, noblemen cultivated well-groomed beards and hair to signal wealth and authority, often using imported oils or combs made of ivory. You're a commoner, so your grooming kit is a rusty knife and a bowl of water, and you're trying to trim your beard to look less like a wild man and more like a lord. The goal. A neat, sculpted look that says, "I'm important," even if your calloused hands betray your days in the fields. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you wince. Some men used a paste of quicklime, yes, the caustic stuff used in mortar, to remove unwanted hair, especially around the face or neck. A 13th century barber's manual from Germany mentions it as a way to refine a man's look, but it could burn skin raw if left on too long. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread practice or just a risky trend among the bold, but you're watching your neighbor dab it on, hissing in pain, and you're glad you're sticking to your dull blade. The smell alone, sharp and chemical, makes your eyes water. Picture the scene. You're in a cramped corner of the village, sitting on a stump as your friend hacks at his beard with a knife that's seen better days. The air's heavy with the scent of sweat and ale, and a crowd of kids giggles as he curses a bad cut. You're trying to tidy your own hair, maybe slicking it with a bit of pig fat to mimic the shiny locks of a knight you saw at market. If you're lucky, you've got a bone comb. If not, you're using your fingers, pulling out knots and maybe a stray louse or two. Nobles had barbers with fancy tools. You've got a mate who's better at shearing sheep than shaping beards. Let's toss in some sarcasm. In a world where you're dodging bandits and bad harvests, it's pure genius to risk chemical burns just to look like you don't shovel manure for a living. The Trotula didn't cover men's grooming, but other texts, like surgical manuals, suggested oils infused with herbs like rosemary to strengthen hair. You're using plain grease, hoping it'll hold your beard together, but it just attracts flies. Some men even dyed their hair with walnut shells or henna, imported at great cost, to fake youth or nobility. You can't afford that, so you're stuck praying your gray strands don't scream, peasant. The stakes were high for men too. A well-groomed appearance could mean respect, a better job, or a chance to court someone above your station. You're at a tavern, eyeing a merchant with a beard so perfect it looks painted on. Your own is patchy, thanks to a botched trim, and you're wondering if you should have tried that quicklime trick. Men also faced pressure to look healthy, clear skin, strong hair, as a sign of vigor. Some even used the same lead-based ceruse we talked about to fake a noble pallor, risking the same toxic side effects as women. Beauty wasn't gendered, it was just brutal. Here's a vivid moment. You're at a village fair, watching a knight strut by, his hair gleaming, his beard trimmed to perfection. Your own face feels like a scrub brush, and your attempt at slicking your hair back has left it stiff and smelling like a barn. A local girl laughs, calling you the greasy hedgehog, and you cringe, knowing your grooming game's not winning any tournaments. Beauty for men was a performance, and you're barely making the stage. The pressure to look noble shaped men's lives, from their beards to their posture. A good appearance could open doors, while a sloppy one could close them. You're starting to see why beauty was such a universal obsession, crossing class and gender lines with equal ferocity. And if you think men's grooming was wild, wait until you tangle with the superstitions tied to beauty. You're still smoothing down that greasy beard, the tavern's laughter ringing in your ears, as you slip back into your smoky hut, where a small charm dangles from a rafter, a knotted cord meant to ward off bad luck, or, maybe, bad looks. In the medieval world, beauty wasn't just about pastes and blades. It was tangled up with superstition, where charms, spells, and rituals could supposedly make you fairer, or at least keep the devil from cursing your face with warts. You're clutching a sprig of vervain, hoping it'll boost your charm, but the line between beauty and magic is blurry, and a little spooky. Superstition was woven into medieval beauty practices, blending faith, fear, and folklore. A mainstream historical fact. By the 13th century, as seen in texts like the Speculum Magus by Vincent of Beauvais, people believed certain herbs or rituals could enhance beauty by aligning the body with divine or natural forces. You're whispering a charm over a bowl of water mixed with rose petals, believing it'll make your skin glow like a saint's halo. The words are half remembered from a village wise woman, and you're not sure if you're praying or casting a spell. Either way, you're splashing it on, hoping for a miracle. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you raise an eyebrow. Some women carried amulets made of toad bones or owl feathers to protect their beauty from evil spirits. A 14th century English folklore record mentions these as charms to keep skin clear or hair lustrous, but they could also mark you as a witch if the wrong person noticed. Historians still argue whether these were common beauty aids or rare eccentricities, but you're tucking a feather under your pillow, just in case. The thought of a priest spotting it makes your stomach churn. Beauty's risky enough without adding heresy to the list. Picture the scene. You're in your hut, the air thick with the scent of herbs and wax, as you tie a cord around a bundle of lavender, muttering words you barely understand. The charm's supposed to make your eyes sparkle, but you're half convinced it's nonsense. Still, you've seen the wise woman's customers swear by her spells, their faces oddly radiant. Or maybe that's just the lead paste we talked about earlier. You're hedging your bets, combining a charm with that nettle paste from a few days ago, hoping the combo doesn't backfire. If it does, you'll be the village's new, cursed face story. Let's toss in some sarcasm. In a world where you're dodging famine and plague, it's peak logic to trust a toad bone to make you marriageable. The Trotula didn't dive into magic, but it hinted at blessed herbs, blurring the line between medicine and mysticism. You're not alone. Nobles and peasants alike whispered prayers over their cosmetics, believing divine favor could enhance their looks. Some even bathed in moonlight-soaked water, thinking it would make their skin luminous. Spoiler, it just made them cold and wet. You're trying it anyway, standing in the chilly night, feeling like a fool but hoping for a glow. The stakes were high because beauty was tied to fate. A clear face could mean divine blessing, a blemish might signal a curse. You're at a market, eyeing a peddler selling holy relics, a dubious saint's knucklebone that supposedly ensures fair skin. You can't afford it, so you stick to your vervain sprig, but the fear lingers. What if your pimples are a sign of sin? Men faced this too, carrying charms to keep their beards full or their scalps from balding. Superstition made beauty a spiritual battlefield, and you're armed with nothing but hope and a feather. Here's a vivid moment. You're at a village fire, the crowd swapping stories of charms gone wrong. A woman whispers about a spell that turned her hair brittle, and you clutch your lavender bundle tighter, wondering if you've doomed yourself. The firelight dances on faces, some suspiciously smooth, and you wonder who's using magic, or just really good ceruse. The priest nearby is preaching against vanity, and you hide your charm, praying he doesn't call you out. Beauty's a gamble, and magic's just another risky bet. Superstition didn't just shape beauty, it shaped your place in the world. A blessed appearance could win you favor, a cursed one could cost you everything. You're starting to see why every beauty step, from toxic creams to now spells, was a leap of faith. And if you think charms were wild, wait until you face the crude reality of medieval cosmetic surgery. You're still clutching that vervain charm, the faint scent of lavender mixing with the smoky air of your medieval hut, when your gaze falls on a rusty knife and a grim realization hits. Some people went under the blade for beauty. In the Middle Ages, cosmetic surgery wasn't the polished art of today. It was a crude, painful gamble, often performed by the same barber surgeons who yanked teeth or bled you for health. You're wincing at the thought of someone slicing your face to fix a scar or reshape a nose, but in this era, beauty was worth the blood. You're about to step into a world where looking better could mean surviving a butcher's touch. Cosmetic surgery, though rare, existed in medieval Europe, driven by the desperate need to fix disfigurements or chase ideals. A mainstream historical fact, 13th century surgeons like Lanfranc of Milan, in texts like Chirurgia Magna, described procedures to repair facial scars or cleft lips, often for aesthetic reasons as much as medical ones. You're standing in a dimly lit shop, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood, as a barber surgeon sharpens his blade. He's promising to smooth a scar from that time you tripped in the market, but his tools look more suited to slaughter than surgery. You're praying he's steadier with a knife than he is with a comb. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you flinch. Some men and women had their noses reshaped by cutting and stitching skin, a primitive attempt at what we'd now call rhinoplasty. A 14th century Italian surgical text mentions fixing misshapen noses to improve marriage prospects, but infection was a near certain risk. Historians still argue whether these procedures were common or reserved for the wealthy desperate enough to try. But you're eyeing that blade, wondering if a straighter nose is worth the agony, or the pus that might follow. The surgeon's confidence is not reassuring, especially since he's chewing garlic. Picture the scene. You're on a wooden bench in a grimy shop, the walls lined with jars of herbs and a suspicious red-stained cloth. The surgeon's muttering about balancing your features, but his hands shake as he threads a needle with coarse thread. You're gripping the bench, the pain of a shallow cut already making you sweat, and the room smells like iron and fear. If you're lucky, you're numbed with a swig of ale or a dab of mandrake paste, but that's a big if. Nobles might afford a skilled physician, but you're stuck with the village jack-of-all-trades, whose last patient left limping. Let's toss in some sarcasm. In a world where you're lucky to survive a toothache, it's pure brilliance to let a guy with a rusty knife carve your face for beauty. The Trotula didn't touch surgery, but other texts, like those by Guy de Chauliac, described stitching wounds to minimize scarring, early cosmetic work. You're not aiming for a full facelift, just a scar fix, but even that's a gamble. Infections were rampant, and anesthesia was a pipe dream. Some tried cauterizing wounds with hot irons to seal them, which sounds about as fun as it feels. You're wondering if your scar's really that bad after all. The stakes were sky high. A fixed face could mean social acceptance or a better marriage, especially for women, whose looks were their currency. Men sought it too. Knights with battle scars wanted to look heroic, not monstrous. You're thinking of that noblewoman with the suspiciously smooth cheek, wondering if she braved the blade or just got lucky with herbs. The process was brutal. No sterile tools, no painkillers, just a prayer and a strong stomach. If you survived without infection, you were a walking miracle. If not, you were a cautionary tale. Here's a vivid moment. You're at a village feast, your face bandaged from a procedure to fix a scar. The pain's throbbing, but you're hoping it'll heal smooth. A nobleman nearby, his own face oddly perfect, boasts about his surgeon's skill, but you notice he flinches when he smiles. The crowd's whispering about your bandage, some calling it brave, others foolish. You catch your reflection in a polished cup, swollen, red, but maybe, just maybe, it'll be worth it. Beauty's a battlefield, and you're bleeding for it. Surgery wasn't just about vanity, it was about status. A flawless face could open doors, a marred one could close them. You're starting to see why every beauty step, from charms to now knives, was a desperate roll of the dice. And if you think a blade to the face was bad, wait until you face the church's wrath over your vanity. You're still tender from that scar-fixing attempt, the bandage on your cheek itching as you sit in your smoky hut, the faint glow of a candle casting shadows on the rough walls. Outside, you hear the church bells ringing, a reminder that the church had a lot to say about your quest for beauty, and none of it was kind. In the medieval world, vanity was a sin, and your efforts to look good could land you in hot water with the priest, or worse, a sermon on eternal damnation. You're clutching that vervain charm from earlier, hoping it doesn't mark you as a sinner, because the church's beauty bans were no joke. The church wielded massive influence over medieval life, including how you looked. A mainstream historical fact. In the 13th century, theologians like Thomas Aquinas, as seen in texts like Summa Theologica, condemned excessive grooming as pride, a deadly sin that could taint your soul. You're smoothing your patched dress, trying to look presentable for Sunday Mass, but you're paranoid about that dab of flour paste on your face. Too much effort, and the priest might call you out for vanity. Too little, and you'll be shamed for sloth. It's a tightrope, and you're wobbling in the candlelight, wondering if your reflection screams, heretic. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you snicker. Some priests claimed red cheeks, whether from rouge or bloodletting, were a sign of devilish seduction. A 14th century sermon from England warned women against painting their faces like Jezebel, linking cosmetics to witchcraft. Historians still argue whether these bans were strictly enforced or just moral grandstanding, but you're scrubbing off that chalky paste before church, just in case. The last thing you need is a public shaming, or a dunk in the village pond to test your piety. Picture the scene: you're in a crowded church, the air thick with incense and the smell of unwashed wool. The priest's droning about humility, his eyes scanning the congregation for signs of vanity. You've hidden your lavender charm under your sleeve and skipped the ceruse, but your neighbor's bright red lips, probably beet juice, are drawing glares. You're trying to look devout, but your patched dress and tangled hair make you feel like you're failing at both beauty and holiness. Nobles get a pass, of course. Their silk veils and subtle powders are elegance, not sin. You're just trying not to get a lecture. Let's toss in some sarcasm. In a world where you're dodging plague and praying for a good harvest, it's peak priorities to worry that your face powder's sending you to hell. The trotula we've referenced stayed mum on church bans, but it suggested modest beauty tricks, like herb washes, to avoid suspicion. You're sticking to plain water today, but even that feels risky when the priest's on a roll about worldly adornment. Some women hid their cosmetics in prayer books, a sneaky move you're tempted to try. Men weren't spared either. Fancy beards or dyed hair could earn a sermon about pride, though knights got away with more than peasants like you. The church's rules weren't just about morality, they were about control. Beauty signaled wealth and status, which threatened the church's grip on social order. You're at a village sermon, head bowed, but you can't help noticing the priest's own clean-shaven face. Hypocrisy much? The bans hit women hardest, tying their looks to virtue or vice. A painted face could mean you were loose, or worse, a witch. You're rethinking that nettle paste from a few days ago, wondering if it's too much. The fear of sin hangs over every beauty choice, from your hair to your scent. Here's a vivid moment. You're slipping out of church, avoiding the priest's stare, when you spot a noblewoman whose veil barely hides her powdered face. She's untouchable, her wealth a shield against sermons. You, meanwhile, are clutching your plain cloak, hoping your clean-ish face doesn't scream vanity. The village gossip's already whispering about a girl who got shamed for her braided hair, and you're not keen to be next. Beauty's a minefield, and the church is holding the map. These bans shaped how you approached beauty, always with one eye on the pulpit. A natural look was safest, but natural didn't win you suitors or status. You're catching on to why every beauty step, from surgery to charms, was a rebellion against both nature and God. And if you think the church was tough, wait until you see how beauty played into social stakes. You're slipping out of that incense-heavy church, the priest's warnings about vanity still ringing in your ears, as you step into the muddy village square, where beauty isn't just a personal obsession, it's a social currency. In the medieval world, your looks could make or break your place in the pecking order, from landing a wealthy suitor to avoiding the scorn of your neighbors. You're smoothing your patched cloak, hoping it hides the flower paste you couldn't resist dabbing on, but the stakes of beauty are higher than a bad sermon. You're about to navigate a world where a pretty face could open doors or slam them shut. Beauty was a social ladder in medieval Europe, dictating everything from marriage prospects to courtly favor. A mainstream historical fact, in the 14th century, as seen in marriage contracts and court records like those from the Potton family in England, a woman's appearance could secure a better match or higher dowry, while men's grooming signaled status and reliability. You're at a village dance, your face scrubbed but still rough from fieldwork, hoping to catch a merchant's eye. Your rival's got a smoother complexion, probably from stolen rosewater, and she's drawing all the attention. Beauty's not just vanity, it's your ticket to a better life, or at least a warmer hearth. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you grin. Some peasants believed rubbing a raw egg on your face could attract suitors by binding their affection, a folk remedy mentioned in 15th century rural tales. Sticky, smelly, and dubious, but you're tempted to try it, cracking an egg over a bowl and hoping it doesn't attract flies instead. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread superstition or just a village oddity, but you're desperate enough to slather it on before tonight's feast. The smell's awful, and you're praying it washes off before someone mistakes you for a walking omelet. Picture the scene: you're at the edge of a crowded market, the air buzzing with haggling and the stench of livestock. You've tied your hair back with a scrap of cloth, mimicking the noblewomen's braids, but it's no match for their silk ribbons. Your face, dusted with that flower paste from earlier, is starting to crack, and you're hyper-aware of every glance. A good appearance could mean a kind word from a lord or a dance with a prosperous farmer. A bad one could leave you ignored or mocked. Nobles glide by, their pale faces and fine clothes screaming wealth, while you're just trying to look less like you milked a cow this morning. Let's toss in some sarcasm. In a world where you're praying your roof doesn't leak, it's pure genius to bet your future on a cracked egg and a prayer for charm. The trotula we've leaned on suggested subtle beauty tricks to enhance natural allure, but for peasants like you, it's about survival. You're not aiming for courtly grace, just enough polish to avoid being the village joke. Men faced this too. A well-groomed merchant might win a contract, while your patchy beard and rough hands mark you as a laborer. You're tempted to try that quicklime hair removal from a few days ago, but the memory of your neighbor's burns stops you. The stakes were brutal. For women, beauty could mean a husband who didn't beat you or a dowry that kept you fed. For men, it could mean respect or a shot at a guild apprenticeship. You're at a wedding, watching the bride, her face suspiciously smooth, maybe from that noblewoman's ceruse trick, while you're stuck with egg residue and a sinking feeling. The groom's got a trimmed beard, probably oiled with something you can't afford, and you're wondering if your own scruffy look is why no one's asking you to dance. Beauty was a game of perception, and losing meant staying invisible. Here's a vivid moment. You're at a harvest feast, the firelight flickering on faces both powdered and plain. A noblewoman's laughter cuts through the crowd, her beauty a weapon that draws every eye. You've tried to keep up, but your egg mask is flaking, and a kid nearby whispers, "She looks like a hen." You blush, wishing you'd stuck to plain water. The social ladder's steep, and beauty's the rope, slippery, fragile, and out of your reach. You're starting to see why every beauty step, from church-defying powders to now social gambles, was a high-stakes bet. Beauty shaped your place in the world, and the pressure to keep up was relentless. A good look could lift you up, a bad one could bury you. And if you think social stakes were tough, wait until you face the fear of disease and disfigurement that haunted every mirror. You're still smarting from that egg-masked mishap at the feast, the sting of laughter clinging to you as you huddle in your dim hut, the air thick with the scent of straw and smoke. Now, a new fear creeps in, one that makes your flower paste and borrowed ribbons feel trivial. In the medieval world, disease and disfigurement weren't just health risks, they were beauty's greatest enemies, threatening to mark your face and ruin your social standing. You're checking your reflection in a murky bowl of water, praying that pimple isn't a sign of something worse, like the plague that's whispered about in every village. Disease shaped medieval beauty ideals, as a clear face was proof you weren't cursed or contagious. A mainstream historical fact, the Black Death, peaking in the 1340s and documented in chronicles like those of Giovanni Boccaccio, left survivors scarred by boils or pockmarks, making unblemished skin a rare and prized asset. You're scrubbing your face with a rag, hoping to keep it smooth, but every blemish feels like a death sentence. The plague wasn't the only threat. Smallpox, leprosy, or even a bad infection could leave you marked, and in a world obsessed with divine judgment, scars were often seen as God's disapproval. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you shudder. Some believed rubbing a dead pigeon on your face could draw out poxmarks or prevent scarring. A 14th century folk remedy from rural France swore by it, claiming the bird's vital essence healed skin. Historians still argue whether this was a common desperation move or just a bizarre local custom, but you're staring at a pigeon corpse, wondering if you're desperate enough to try. The smell alone is enough to make you gag, and you're pretty sure it'll attract more flies than suitors. Picture the scene. You're in your hut, the air heavy with damp and the distant sound of church bells. You're inspecting your face for new marks, terrified that a red spot might be leprosy or a pox. Your neighbor's kid has a scarred face from smallpox, and the village shuns him, whispering about curses. You're doubling down on that nettle paste from earlier, hoping it keeps your skin clear, but the fear's constant. Nobles could hide scars with sarus or veils. You're stuck with plain rags and prayers. If you're lucky, you've got a healer who knows herbs, but most cures are as risky as the diseases themselves. Let's toss in some sarcasm. In a world where you're dodging death by bad water, it's pure genius to rub a dead bird on your face to stay pretty. The trotula we've referenced suggested herbal washes to purify skin, but it didn't mention plagues, probably because no herb could fix a pox-ridden face. You're trying a mix of sage and ale, hoping it wards off blemishes, but the memory of that lead paste's side effects makes you nervous. Some folks turn to charms, like that vervain sprig you're still clutching, believing they'd protect against disease's marks. Spoiler, they didn't. The stakes were brutal. A scarred face could mean exile, lepers were often banished to colonies, or at least social death. You're at a market, avoiding a man with pockmarks who's begging for scraps, his face a warning of what could happen. Women faced harsher judgment. A marred face could tank your marriage prospects, leaving you a spinster or worse. Men weren't spared either. A knight's battle scars were heroic, but a peasant's disease marks? Just proof you were unclean. You're checking your skin obsessively, knowing one bad mark could change everything. Here's a vivid moment. You're at a village well, fetching water, when you overhear gossip about a girl whose smallpox scars cost her a betrothal. Your own face feels tight from that herbal wash, and you're praying it's enough. A noblewoman passes, her veil hiding any flaws, and you envy her ability to conceal what you can't. The crowd's eyes linger on you, searching for signs of disease, and you pull your hood tighter. Beauty's a shield, and disease is its sword, cutting through your hopes with every mark. Fear of disfigurement didn't just shape beauty, it shaped survival. A clear face was a passport to acceptance, a scarred one was a sentence. You're starting to see why every beauty step, from pigeon corpses to prayers, was a desperate fight against fate. And if you think disease was scary, wait until you see how foreign trends twisted beauty even further. You're still haunted by that fear of pox scars, your fingers tracing your face for any telltale bumps as you stand in your drafty hut, the air thick with the scent of damp straw and fading herbs. Now, a new wave of beauty madness catches your eye. A vial of strange, spicy oil from a far-off land. bartered from a merchant who swears it's what they use in the East. In the medieval world, foreign influences brought exotic trends that warped beauty standards, adding a layer of allure and danger to your already risky routine. You're sniffing the oil, half curious, half terrified, ready to dive into a world where global trade turned beauty into a bizarre melting pot. Foreign goods and ideas reshaped medieval beauty, especially among the elite. A mainstream historical fact, by the 13th century, as trade routes expanded under the Pax Mongolica, European courts imported luxury items like saffron, myrrh, and silk from the Middle East and Asia, as noted in Venetian trade records. You're dabbing this imported oil on your wrists, hoping its sharp, musky scent makes you smell like a Byzantine princess. It's pricey, costing more than your monthly bread, but the promise of exotic allure is tempting. The catch: you have no idea what's in it, and it's burning your skin just a little. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you blink. Some noblewomen used kohl, a black eyeliner from the Islamic world, to darken their eyes and brows, believing it gave them a mystical look. A 14th century travelogue by Ibn Battuta mentions European ladies adopting this trend, but it could cause eye infections if mixed with lead or antimony. Historians still argue whether kohl was a widespread fad or an elite quirk, but you're tempted to smudge some charcoal around your eyes to mimic it, hoping it doesn't blind you. The merchant swore it's safe, but his grin was shadier than a castle dungeon. Picture the scene: you're at a bustling market, the air alive with shouts and the scent of spices from distant lands. A trader's stall is piled with strange powders and oils, each promising to make you look like a Saracen queen or a Mongol empress. You've bartered a chicken for a tiny vial of saffron-infused oil, and you're rubbing it on, wincing at the sting but dreaming of courtly glances. Nobles flaunt these imports, silk veils, amber perfumes, while you're stuck with a knockoff version that smells like it was brewed in a ditch. The exotic trend is a status symbol, but it's also a gamble with your skin and your coin. Let's toss in some sarcasm. In a world where you're praying your well water isn't poisoned, it's pure genius to slather on a mystery oil from halfway across the globe. The trotula we've leaned on praised foreign ingredients like myrrh for their noble scent, but you're using a dubious mix that might be rancid olive oil with a pinch of spice. These trends came with risks. Foreign cosmetics could be adulterated with toxins, and allergies were a roll of the dice. You're thinking of that civet perfume from earlier and wondering if this new oil is any safer. Spoiler: probably not. The stakes were high because exotic beauty signaled wealth and worldliness. At a feast, a noblewoman's kohl-rimmed eyes or saffron-scented hair could secure a lord's favor, while your homemade herb wash just makes you smell like a stew. Men jumped in too. Knights used imported henna to dye their beards, hoping to look like battle-hardened heroes from the Crusades. You're tempted to try a spice paste on your hair, but the memory of that burning nettle mask makes you hesitate. Foreign trends were a shortcut to status, but they often came with a side of suffering. Here's a vivid moment. You're at a village fair, watching a merchant's wife with coal-darkened eyes and a silk scarf that screams, "I've seen Constantinople." Your own oil is starting to itch, and you're wondering if you've been duped. The crowd's buzzing, some mocking your fancy scent, others envious. You catch your reflection in a trader's polished brass. Your eyes are red, not mystical, and you're praying this trend doesn't leave you scarred. Beauty's a global game now, and you're barely keeping up. Foreign influences didn't just add glamour, they raised the stakes. Looking exotic could elevate you, but one bad batch could ruin you. You're starting to see why every beauty step, from disease dodging to now foreign fads, was a high-risk chase for perfection. And if you think exotic oils were wild, wait until you handle the torture devices they called beauty tools. You're still scratching at the itchy spot where that spicy foreign oil burned your wrist, the air in your hut thick with a mingled sense of straw, smoke, and your latest beauty blunder. Now, your eyes land on a table cluttered with tools that look more suited for a blacksmith than a beauty routine. Crude combs, sharp tweezers, and a contraption that might be for curling hair or torturing spies. In the medieval world, beauty tools were as painful as they were essential, turning your quest for perfection into a test of endurance. You're gripping a bone comb, bracing for the sting, ready to face the devices that made beauty a literal trial by fire. Beauty tools were a key part of medieval grooming, often as brutal as the standards they served. A mainstream historical fact, by the 14th century, as seen in household inventories from noble estates like those of the Medici family, the wealthy used specialized tools like ivory combs and metal tweezers for hair and skin care, while peasants made do with homemade versions. You're tugging that splintery bone comb through your tangled hair, each snag feeling like a personal attack. The goal is to look polished, but right now, you're just trying not to cry, or bleed, while dreaming of the smooth locks you saw on that noblewoman at the fair. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you wince. Some women used hot iron rods, heated over a fire, to curl their hair or shape their wimples, a practice mentioned in 15th century French court records. One wrong move, and you're sporting a burn instead of a curl. Historians still argue whether this was a common trend or mostly an elite risk, but you're eyeing a rusty rod by the hearth, wondering if it's worth singeing your scalp to mimic those courtly waves. The smell of burnt hair from your neighbor's attempt last week isn't encouraging, but beauty calls. Picture the scene. You're hunched in your dim hut, a candle flickering as you wrestle with a pair of iron tweezers, trying to pluck your eyebrows into that high, noble arc. The tweezers are dull, more likely to pinch than pluck, and every tug brings tears to your eyes. Your beauty kit includes a cracked comb, a sharpened stick for cleaning nails, and a stone for scraping calluses, hardly the stuff of glamour. Nobles might have polished mirrors and delicate tools. You've got a reflective shard of metal and a lot of grit. Every pull of the comb or scrape of the stone feels like a battle, and you're losing. Let's toss in some sarcasm. In a world where you're dodging wolves and bad harvests, it's pure brilliance to risk third-degree burns for a hairstyle that'll unravel by noon. The trochanter we've referenced suggested smoothing skin with pumice stones, but it didn't mention the blisters they could leave. You're scraping your hands with a rough stone, hoping for that soft, noble look, but it just makes you look like you fought a hedge. Some tools, like heated tongs for shaping veils, doubled as torture devices. One slip, and you're branded. Men used them too, curling beards or trimming hair, but your shaky hands make you stick to the basics. The stakes were high because tools weren't just about grooming, they were about status. A smooth hand or neat hair could signal you weren't a field laborer, even if your calluses told the truth. You're at a village market, watching a lady's maid use a silver comb on her mistress's hair, each stroke a reminder of the gap between you. Your own comb's snapping bristles, and you're praying it holds up. Men faced this too. Knights polished their armor and their beards with equal care, while you're stuck with a knife that's better for gutting fish than grooming. Here's a vivid moment. You're at a harvest dance, your hair half tamed by that wretched comb, when a nobleman's squire struts by, his curls suspiciously perfect. You're sure he's used a hot rod, and the faint smell of singed hair confirms it. Your own attempt at plucking your brows has left you red and patchy, and a kid nearby snickers, calling you the plucked chicken. You laugh it off, but inside, you're cursing your tools. Beauty's a war, and your weapons are barely holding together. These tools shaped not just your looks but your place in the world. A good comb or a steady hand could elevate you, a bad one could leave you scarred or mocked. You're starting to see why every beauty step, from foreign oils to now torture devices, was a painful gamble. And as you brace for the final stretch, you'll reflect on how this medieval madness still echoes today. You're still nursing a sore scalp from that bone comb's assault, the faint sting of plucked brows lingering as you sit in your smoky hut, the air heavy with the scent of straw and the ghosts of every beauty blunder you've tried. Now, you're looking back on this wild ride through medieval beauty, from toxic pastes to torture tools, and wondering how it all left a mark, not just on your skin but on the world that followed. The obsession with looking perfect wasn't just a medieval quirk, it's a thread that weaves through time, tying your struggles to the mirror gazers of today. You're about to reflect on the legacy of this vanity, where the past's crazy beauty hacks still whisper in our modern routines. The medieval quest for beauty wasn't just about looking good, it shaped culture, class, and even survival. A mainstream historical fact, the beauty practices of the Middle Ages, as seen in texts like the trochanter and courtly art, influenced Renaissance ideals, with pale skin and high foreheads persisting as symbols of wealth and virtue into the 16th century. You're sitting there, your face still tingling from that saffron oil, realizing that your fight for a noble glow wasn't so different from a modern influencer chasing likes with a new filter. The tools and risks have changed, but the game, status, power, acceptance, remains eerily familiar. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you smile. Medieval women sometimes slept with slices of raw meat on their faces to draw out impurities, a trick mentioned in a 15th century English household manual. Sounds like a bad TikTok hack, right? Historians still argue whether this was a common practice or a desperate one-off, but you're glad you skipped that in favor of your nettle paste, even if it burned. The idea of waking up with beef stuck to your cheeks is a step too far, but it's a reminder that beauty's always been a bit absurd, and we're still falling for it. Picture the scene: you're in your hut, the candle nearly burned out, as you wipe the last of your homemade remedies from your face. Your beauty kit is a mess: cracked combs, a vial of rancid oil, a sprig of vervain for luck. You've tried it all: lead paste, bloodletting, egg masks, even that risky eyebrow pluck. Each step was a gamble, from dodging infection to dodging the priest's sermons. Yet, you're not alone. Centuries later, people are still chasing ideals, swapping cerus for contour and charms for serums. The mirror's shinier now, but the pressure's the same, pushing you to look like something you're not. Let's toss in some sarcasm. In a world where you're lucky to survive winter, it's hilarious that you're stressing over a meat mask or a high forehead, just like we stress over skincare routines today. The trochanter and its ilk laid the groundwork for modern cosmetics, with their herb washes and oils echoing in today's natural products. You're thinking of that crocodile dung mask from way back and laughing. Modern beauty gurus would probably call it organic. The medieval drive to look blessed or noble lives on in our filters and fillers, a reminder that vanity's a timeless beast. The legacy of medieval beauty is in its contradictions. It was empowering, giving you a shot at a better life, but punishing, with risks that could scar or kill. You're reflecting on how those queens with their plucked foreheads set a standard that trickled down to you, and how your flower paste attempts are echoed in today's drugstore hacks. Men, too, chased ideals. Knights with oiled beards aren't so far from guys obsessing over grooming vlogs. Beauty was a universal language, spoken in pain and hope, and its echoes linger in every selfie and skincare ad. Here's a vivid moment. You're at a village fire, the last embers glowing, surrounded by faces marked by the same beauty battles. Scars from bad tools, stains from cheap dyes. You're laughing about that egg mask disaster, but deep down, you know it's not just about looks. It's about wanting to be seen, valued, maybe loved. That want hasn't changed, from your muddy village to a glowing smartphone screen. Beauty's a mirror, reflecting who we are and who we wish to be, across centuries. Now, let's ease you into the quiet of the night, the fire's glow fading to a soft hum in your mind. You've walked through the gritty, risky world of medieval beauty, from lead-laced creams to blades that promised perfection but delivered pain. Picture yourself setting down that splintery comb, the weight of the day's struggles slipping away like water through your fingers. The hut grows still, the air cool and calm, carrying only the faint scent of lavender from that charm you tucked away. Those high foreheads, pale faces, and exotic oils, they're just stories now, drifting like smoke into the dark. Close your eyes, and let the clamor of the village fade. The market shouts, the priest's sermons, the whispers of who's fairest. You're just you, no cerus or corset needed, your breath slow and steady like the rhythm of a distant tide. The medieval world's gone quiet, its beauty battles left behind in the flicker of a dying candle. Sleep's waiting, soft as a wool blanket, ready to wrap you in dreams where you're enough, just as you are. Rest now, and let the past dissolve into whispers.